two main issues. Funnily enough, we're going to talk about, first of all, implied terms. We're going to see that there are a variety of ways in which terms can be implied into the contract. Typically, they can be implied in by law and also as a matter of fact. And although we're not going to consider all of those considerations, we're going to look at recent case law, which can give us considerable guidance as to when we might want to do this or when the courts indeed may be likely to do this. Once we've gone through that discussion, set out the various tests, consider what needs to be done, and so on, we will then move on to talk about the issue of good faith. Three things that we'll talk about there in detail. We'll talk about the meaning of good faith. We'll see that that is something that has been subject to considerable scrutiny in recent case law. We'll then go on to talk about express duties of good faith. Are they valid? Well, the answer absolutely is yes, but the bigger issue is how they will be interpreted by the courts. Will that be broadly or narrowly? And then finally, we'll see that one of the most controversial aspects of our contract law at the moment is essentially the issue of implied duties of good faith. And we have made some progress in this, but we are still very much lacking a definitive Supreme Court ruling that would settle this question once and for all. So what is a relational contract? Well, you see here, longer-term relationship, substantial commitment, may require some of these things: communication, cooperation, predictable performance, mutual trust and confidence, expectations of loyalty. That identifies something that looks a bit like a relational contract, which may be more likely to attract the duty. But the key thing to note is this particular phrase here. First of all, not legislated for in express terms. So remember, we won't add an implied duty of good faith if there's an express one. But then he goes on to use phrases that, again, come from the Marks and Spencer tests. Implicit in the party's understanding, necessary to give business efficacy. So yes, we can identify something as a relational contract, but typically we're still going to need to think about the Marks and Spencer tests, he says. Now, what sort of agreements, commercial contracts, might fall within the definition of a relational contract? Well, these things here. That is not an exhaustive list, however, and it is also important to note that just because something's a relational contract on the face of it does not necessarily mean that there will be an implied term of good faith.